Hello, my name is Matthew, and we've been reading the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoyevsky. It's our read along for December, and I finished the book, and I thought, what better way to conclude this series than having a conversation with uh, my fellow booktuber, Ami from Ivan's Nightmare. Ami, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Matthew. It's wonderful to be talking to you again, and it's wonderful to be discussing one of my favorite books of all time with you.
Yeah, so we're gonna just chat about the book. I'll give a brief summary of where we left off to the end of the book. Dmitri has had his very dramatic and fateful night, which ended with him being interrogated and arrested for the murder of his father. We have an episode with the school children, which Alyosha is involved. And then Dmitri is in jail, and Alyosha spends a good portion of the end of the novel going around town dealing with the repercussions that this family and all of this activity has done to affect all of these different characters that we've met. We visit Dmitri in jail. Ivan at this point is back in town, but very much in the shadows. He's always just been somewhere, but had just left. When Alyosha finally confronts Ivan, we find out that he's really unwell. Ivan is racked with guilt. We find out that he's been having these visits with Smerdyakov that become eerier and more enlightening. And then we have the great chapter, Ivan's Nightmare, where Ivan is visited by the devil. And then the court case, we have it turns into a court procedural, which ends with Dmitri being found guilty. And then the epilogue is a child's funeral. So that's sort of a summary of the ending of the book. Would you kind of agree with most of that?
Totally.
Yeah. Really kind of racing through everything that happened. But Ami and I are going to just talk about some specific points, and then the novel more broadly and what interests us and questions that we have, and things like that. So, Ami, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this time around, this read through, one of the things that really stood out to me was the amount of this narrative around the children, the school children. It's something which I think you've surfaced and you talked about in some of the videos you've been making. But it's like really glaring how Dostoyevsky seems to be working on these two registers, like these two parallel narrative lines, which maybe at points sort of like barely touch each other, but not really. And I'm just curious what you made of that.
So I've read the book a few times now, and what I keep realizing is how, even though we have these really distinct chapters that are focused on the school children, there's children throughout the whole book. At the very beginning, seemingly it's unnecessary to see the family members, to see Ivan and Dmitri and Alyosha as little children. We have details of Alyosha way too young to remember his mother, and yet he does. We have that woman outside the monastery talking to Father Zosima and asking how to reconcile the grief of her lost child with her faith in God. The chapter right before the Grand Inquisitor, is it Rebellion?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly.
the focus that Ivan takes to make his argument is the suffering of children, and so it's on the minds and very much apparent throughout uh, the main narrative. And to me, what I've been thinking is that they're kind of the same story. These are the same people going through the same suffering at different stages of life, and then also different like socioeconomical levels. The Karamazov family are either very well off or at least doing very well, whereas much of the children that we follow are just totally destitute. So instead of like these two distinct storylines, more and more they feel like they're actually the same. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And for me, I think when I was thinking about this question, something that came up was from the chapter Rebellion. So in that chapter, Ivan is talking to Alyosha and he's saying, I want to talk to you about suffering, human suffering. And he says, I'm going to restrict my argument to just the suffering of children. He says, like, I could talk more broadly about suffering, but adults are like annoying. Like adults are like hard to deal with. And that's like another theme I think throughout the book, this idea that like you get sick of people, like you get sick of human beings, but it says, but anyone, can love children. Like children are innocent. And the other thing that he says is that, adults have eaten from the fruit, right? Again, it's the idea of innocence, children are innocent. And so, yeah, there's like these two narrative tracks that are running parallel. And there's like a level of vulnerability and a level as a reader of anxiety that I feel when I read about the narrative surrounding the children, because it's just so much more like dangerous and raw and delicate in a way. So like, for example, there's like this character Kolya, who's like this extremely precocious schoolboy, and he has like big ideas about philosophy. Like you imagine maybe he'll be like a future Ivan because he has like ideas about God and stuff like that. And like one day he decides on a dare to like lie down on the tracks, underneath the train, and like it's such an anxiety-inducing chapter, and just everything is like it feels so raw and so sensitive in a way which maybe it could feel potentially for the adult chapters if I was like more empathetic with these people.
So the novel has I believe 2 funerals. We have at least Father Zosima is laid out, and then at the end of the book, Alyosha, is that how you say it?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Alyosha has a funeral, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But there's a detail that comes up in both. One is almost the comedic effect, and the other one is like the hammer blow. Father Zosima stinks. There's a putrefaction that fills up. We're told that at the child's funeral, he didn't smell at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're shown Father Zosima as basically the saint. But according to Ivan's argument, nonetheless, he's eaten from the fruit. The child is still more innocent and more pure than the best of us.
Yeah. And if we think about Alyosha, not Ilyosha, so Alyosha with an A, as sort of like the protagonist of the book, as like the central character, and what makes him so special and so unique is like his love for humanity, his like love for people, and the way he could fit right in, with the schoolboys. Yeah, I feel like it gives us like some insight, into. It's hard to explain, but again, like the a narrative about children and the vulnerability of children just reads differently, than a parallel narrative about adults who are like just eating each other up, or fighting with each other. And I feel like it's sort of like putting on Alyosha's glasses in a way. If that makes sense. I don't even know if it makes sense.
So like Alyosha is this innocent, measured, mature, compassionate character, and he's thrown like a volleyball. He's just thrown back and forth into like these escalating situations that have all of these people doing all of these terrible things, and he's shown to be restrained. But the best example of his restraint, in my mind, was having his finger bitten by a strange little kid.
Yeah.
And his reaction to that.
Yeah.
It's like a superhuman level. Can you imagine having your finger bitten by a little kid?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be infuriating, if not worse. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Kids are playing, like, they're throwing rocks at each other. He specifically went over to play with these kids as a reprieve. It was going to be this, oh, look, here's some children. I have all of this stuff going on in my life. And instead, it turns into one of the worst aspects of the entire novel, one of the worst situations that he put in. But it shows his character so much.
Right. And he cares. He went to like intercede, I think, because he saw them like throwing rocks. And another example like that, along those lines, a similar kind of Alyosha story, is with Kolya. I remember because like Kolya is this like really precocious, arrogant kid, and all these kids are like, I mean, especially like Kolya, like he's like really like, he's a kid, so it's forgivable. But if he was an adult, he'd be like a psychopath, you know, like with some of the things he does. But he's like telling Alyosha how there's like this nasty rumor going around that he played like horsies or something with like little kids, you know, and it's like don't believe the rumor, you know. It's not, I did it just because I was like babysitting or here's some excuse. And Alyosha's like, adults go to the theater, you know, to watch, you know, people ride on horses. It's like the same thing. But it's like idea of like no judgments, you know, and all his interactions, because he often disagrees with people. He disagrees certainly with Ivan over philosophy. He, you know, disagrees with things Kolya says, and other examples throughout the book. He takes a strong stand, but like no one is ever afraid of his judgment or afraid of that disagreement or anything, because it's like always from a place of love.
I over and over again, it seems like almost every character, I can't think of a character that doesn't. There's always these moments where each character is recognizing the goodness in Alyosha in all sorts of different ways. And their reaction to that is a little different, but it's always basically the same. Like, even if they can't help themselves, they can still trust him, because it's always coming from a place of goodness.
Mm-hmm.
With all of that patience and all of that, he's still firm in his convictions, keeping his principles. And in these tense moments, everyone keeps going to him. He's like the go-to guy. Anytime someone needs to like relay a message or get something across, it's always Alyosha. And it makes sense. Everyone loves him.
Right. And everyone's so busy with goals. You know, everyone has like Dmitri is fighting with his father, and Ivan has his own, you know, subterfuge. He at points says that he wishes his father was dead also, and he's potentially in cahoots with Smerdyakov, and you know, depending how you want to read those chapters, and you know, he's also involved in his political writings. But Alyosha just isn't someone who gets caught up in those kind of things. You know, he's you know, a word that comes to mind is just detached, and in a very good way. He's just present with people and not no agenda. You know, he's not.
Well, there's a couple details given about Alyosha at the beginning of the book, and it's about money,
Mm-hmm.
how he money, and how he interacts with people. Somebody says, I can't remember, but basically he's like the only person in Russia that you could drop in town square and he'd be totally fine. I love that. Isn't that great?
Is exactly. I highlighted that quote for myself. I took it out of I put it in a document of quotes that I wanted to save. Yeah. Here is perhaps the one man in the world whom you might leave alone without a penny in the center of an unknown town of 1 million inhabitants, and he would not come to harm. He would not die of cold and hunger, for he'd be fed and sheltered at once. And it goes on. And the people wouldn't see it as a burden. They would look at it as a pleasure, you know? Yeah.
It sums it up really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Ivan's Nightmare?
Sure. Sure.
So what's going on there?
So I think what's happening in that chapter is part of the brilliance of the book is like there's this big plot twist that Ivan feels guilty for the murder of his father. That's like a huge plot twist. And I think a lot of the narrative that sort of underlies that like happens off stage, you know, like we get bits and pieces, we get hints of it, but like Ivan was, you know, having communications with Smerdyakov and, you know, telling him that, you know, there's no God and that everything is lawful, you know, and it's sort of influencing Smerdyakov philosophically. And we only get like crumbs until this like crazy scene where the devil shows up as like this unpleasant, needy kind of visitor, like a relative on like straight and means kind of a person, like the last person you want like in your house, and he comes to like just taunt Ivan with his own ideas about God and his own ideas about morality, and it just I think it explains a lot about like what Ivan was working on and like thinking about throughout the whole book, because we didn't have access to it necessarily until now. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's like what it does on a narrative level, but on like an artistic level, on an aesthetic level, I think it's like one of the most incredible chapters in all of literature. I think it's like it floors me with this brilliance of like being taunted by this hallucination who's like so witty and so biting, you know?
I think to me the payoff in this, we have Smerdyakov and Ivan and Dmitri and Fyodor the father, but uh, the first reveal, the first great scene that we have with Ivan is at the monastery, and he's arguing with the other monks or whatever, and Father Zosima comes back in and knows what he's talking about, and the only thing that he says to Ivan is calls him out on not really believing the things that he says and believing the things that he thinks, and says the most dangerous thing that you can do for yourself is to lie to yourself. We're told that like, that's the first character trait of Ivan. And then we get to see him not caring about Smerdyakov being suspicious, not caring about his father, not caring about Alyosha. All the while, he's lying to himself. And then we finally get this great climactic clash with Ivan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's amazing. Yeah,
it's totally amazing. And this in this most recent read, things that jumped out at me that haven't jumped out at me in the past from that scene, like from Ivan's Nightmare, is the way they're discussing. They're talking about, they have a big fight because Ivan keeps telling the devil, "You're not real," you know, and the devil sounds like he's trying to prove that he is real, you know, like Ivan says to the devil, "I'll kick you," and the devil's, "Oh, that will prove that you think I'm real." And then at one point, this is like a line that just jumped out at me because I feel like it's also a metaphor for like Ivan struggling with his belief in God, you know, because I think that's part of Ivan's crisis at this point. Because up until now, he was like totally atheistic, and now he's like has this crisis of conscience. And so he says like, "I don't even believe in you like to 1,000th of a grain or something like that." And so the devil says, well, then maybe to 10,000th or whatever. And he says, "Homeopathic doses are the strongest." And I thought it was such like an amazing line, you know? And like, yeah, and then Ivan just like this crisis of belief, you know, where, and the devil's just taunting him about it.
So this is the chapter that's kind of directly after the three interactions with Smerdyakov, and very surprisingly, Smerdyakov is much more clever, much smarter, and much more devious and successful than we had been led to believe. And we have that dual purpose feeling of the reader and Ivan both realizing this at the same time. And Smerdyakov is making a lot of really good points. How do you, what's your takeaway with that, especially if, in relation to how that directly follows into Ivan's nightmare chapter?
I mean, like Smerdyakov like destroys Ivan, like he like breaks him, you know.
Yeah.
And Smerdyakov again is such an incredible character. I've read him in the past as basically being a psychopath, but maybe that's wrong. I don't know. But just like he's able to, he understood so much, you know, he saw so much with his interactions with Ivan. He like was so on top of what was going on. He was on top of Ivan's psychology. And then also when he plays out the murder, because he confesses to Ivan the murder, which is an amazing moment in the book. When he confesses the murder and he's like running circles around Ivan again. Like Ivan says to him, why didn't you just take the money? Why did you tear the envelope and throw the money out? And Smerdyakov was like, of course I had to do that, because if Dmitri was the one taking the money, he's like, you know, he would make sure the money, I know the money's in the envelope, but Dmitri doesn't know. He has to open it to find out the money's actually there. You know, like and like for Ivan, and I think for the reader also to an extent, like that's a shocker, you know, that Smerdyakov is so on top of everything, you know. And then the fallout is Ivan is like destroyed. Like Ivan is like a shell of a person after that.
There's a moment in their conversation. Ivan outright says it, goes, "You're smarter than I thought."
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And Smerdyakov goes, "Well, that's because of your pride. Couldn't see past himself." It's
Right.
like brutal. Like just hit it. Every time that he speaks, it's just going straight to the core of Ivan. I also like it's really effective, that like malicious but kind of like oily politeness in his tone.
Exactly.
It's just so weaselly.
Yeah. It's like Iago from like Shakespeare in a way, like just like exactly like playing people in such a, you know, slimy way. Yeah.
Towards the end of it, Ivan is like asking him questions, like because he's become like genuinely curious. He goes, "Well, what would happen if Dmitri didn't show up?"
Right.
He wants to like understand what's going through his mind. He goes, "Well, then we wouldn't have done it." He goes, "Well, what if Dmitri actually killed him? He would have gotten the money, and you wouldn't have gotten the money. The money wasn't even there."
Right.
It's just so great.
That was great. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah.
So one of the things that I was thinking about is how the second half of the book, so much of the second half of the book, is folding back in itself. We have this. The novel begins with introducing all of these characters, and finally we get the meat of the story. It's going to be everything around the murder, all of the motives, all the characters, and then after we go through that episode, almost the whole rest of the novel is re-examining, going over and over this one situation from as many points of views as possible. And I find that really curious, just in a narrative point of view. Like all of a sudden we're stuck in this loop. Also, I just can't believe how thrilling it is. It really feels like one of those celebrity, like the O.J. Simpson trial, or just like one of those celebrity trials where you know all of the facts, but every day you're going back to it. What do you think of all of that? Like, do you have that feeling of how it's just at one point it just folds back in?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I totally agree. And I would also add to that point maybe that like I feel like Dostoevsky accomplished a legal procedural, in a way. Like if you think of great movies about you mentioned the O.J. Simpson trial, which is like basically that exactly that kind of thing where you take this court case which is riveting, and the drama, like the courtroom drama and the drama of all the witnesses, and all the lawyer's arguments and the back and forth, and he pulls that off like masterfully.
I love just a detail, but I just love when Dmitri comes marching in to the courthouse and he's wearing his fancy suit. Like he just can't possibly get over himself. He's still going out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's the worst person to be in the room.
Mm.
He is heckling and yelling. Um, the thing that I find so interesting is for all of the things that we know, we're supposed to dislike Dmitri. And everything is saying that no matter what the facts are, he really should be guilty, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not doing anything at all to help himself. I think it's I think it's how a lot of that dramatic tension gets built. Not so much having a good person that's guilty, having the worst person, and having that conflict. Another example of Alyosha being a genuinely good person is, unlike Alyosha, we know that he really didn't do it. Alyosha doesn't know that. And at the very end of it, when the little boy says, "Is your brother guilty?" There's no hesitation. He goes, "My brother's innocent."
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And a piece of this that I was paying a lot of attention to on this reread was that unlike a normal sort of courtroom detective kind of drama, like what you'd expect in a normal version of this is there's like an innocent and a guilty party, and then like the court like gets it either right or wrong, and like either like what I'm saying, like there's like two binary options here, but this is like so much more complex, like the sense of what guilt means. And so because on the one hand you have the whole sense in which Ivan has concluded that he's guilty, which is again like this kind of like metaphysical guilt. There's obviously like the guilt of Smerdyakov and then Ivan by association with Smerdyakov. But then in Dmitri's case, there's like the sense in which again like he's basically guilty. Like he wrote the letter to I think he wrote to Grushenko, if I remember correctly, saying like I'm going to go to my father and kill him to get your money. And he did, like he went, like it was like everything but it's like 99.99%, you know what I'm saying? And he admits freely, he confesses freely that I wanted to kill my father, and after the night of the incident, he says, "I killed that man," and they thought he was talking about his father, but really he was speaking of the valet. What's the name of the valet? I forget right off the top of my head. It doesn't matter.
Gregory.
Yeah, Gregory. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he knocked Gregory down. He thought he killed Gregory. So like it's hard to explain this, but like there, and then also on top of this, Dmitri accepts his fate. Like he's so accepting of the fact that like I'm gonna go to. I mean, in the end, maybe he escapes, but like he tells his family members, like he tells Alyosha that like I'm gonna go to Siberia and be redeemed by my suffering. And so it's like it's not a clear sense of like mistaken identity here, that because in every way but like the most crucial way, he did murders. He would have murdered his father.
So the setup, so that's like so much of the complex, really layered positioning of all of these arguments. One of the things that I was thinking about through the novel is something that takes that situation and puts it in a more interesting perspective, and that's how the narration changes throughout the novel. And at the beginning of the book, there's a lot of like plural articles. It'll say we or our, and so the reader's in a position where there's a collective gossip, and we're a part of it. And at some point, it just has to. It goes totally omniscient, and we can be a lens moving around, getting all the information that we need to get. And then right around the court, the court case, and with Ivan, it switches to be a specific person that's telling a story. It's one person, and the reader is now not included. We're pushed out, and we have one person telling us the story. And in the trial, we have the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The prosecutor is someone that's grown up with these people, he knows them, he's part of the town. And then we have the defense attorney, which is really a strange choice, is an out-of-towner. And he's the one defending his innocence. Earlier on in the novel, we were a part of the town and we know what's going on. But now we're supposed to pretend that we don't really have all the facts and we're watching it. And so what happens is, as a reader, I'm in a dilemma of how I want to approach the case. How do I want to look at it? Like, I know that he's innocent, but now I'm just, I'm listening to him over there. Clearly, he needs to be sentenced guilty.
Right.
I think that narration compounds the complexity and difficulty of black and white, right and wrong, innocent or guilty.
Yeah, I think that's really astute. It's something which I didn't even pay attention to really until you pointed it out. I think that's totally right. And when I thought about it more, I guess I feel sort of like after the murder, the genre of the book seems to shift a little bit, which is interesting. And not in a bad way, of course, but it's like you could sort of divide the book at some point, and it sort of feels like it's two different styles.
I sort of had a joke in my head, like, not to discredit Dostoyevsky because he's a genius and a really, really good writer, but the choice to go from one narrative device to another, I loved it how the narrator goes, like, I'm not really an expert in court procedurals, which, like, made me think, like, this is Dostoyevsky covered his tracks.
Yeah, he does a lot of funny meta stuff like that, like saying like things he couldn't remember. So I couldn't remember everything that was said, but of course he's like transcribing word for word, like pages and pages. You know, like yeah.
I think my favorite meta part is during that interrogation where the chief of police and the other investigators are constantly trying to get information out of Dmitri, and he goes, if you want every single detail, it'll take 4 novels plus an epilogue.
Yeah, I know, it's great. It's a great line. Yeah. That's amazing.
So we end the novel. It just ends. Dmitri is guilty. What do you think of this epilogue?
With Alyosha and the children and the funeral. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. It's hard to answer. I mean, it's a great question. It's like it's the question, right? I don't necessarily have a great answer, but it says a lot, I think, about the tone, and here's one thing I think that's clear. Okay, it says that for Dostoyevsky, this is not a police procedural. Okay, like that's what it says. Like, this is not a Sherlock Holmes novel where, like, they either catch the crime and he confesses. And this is not what it's about. And yeah, I mean, it relates, of course, back to our previous question of why do we have all this narrative surrounding the schoolboys? But you know, like Dmitri, for example, he has this nightmare. He has this dream when he's being interrogated for the first time, the night of the father's death, and he has a dream of like a starving child, you know, and he's like haunted by this dream. Again, parallel to Ivan's chapter Rebellion, where he's, you know, haunted by suffering of children, and like Dmitri will like make these ejaculations that out of context, no one knows what he's talking about. Like, why is the child hungry or something like that, you know? And like, like in a deep sense, the questions that I think Dostoyevsky is trying to get at here are just so much larger. You see it also in the back and forth of the lawyers. Like they keep bringing up metaphysics. You know, they keep saying like what would Jesus do in this situation? Like, what is the you know, the most, you know, what is it? They have this metaphor of the troika, which is like this running carriage, which is Russia, you know, and people are gonna run out of the way when they see that we let like parasites off the hook, you know. They're trying to read this as a metaphor, and they're trying to like read this for like it's like greater themes, you know. And I think that's true at every step of the way, and I think it's true in the epilogue in a way.
So I think that's I agree. I love the point about making the distinction about this. This is a broader picture. This isn't about this family or this trial or this murder. And at the end, the way that I see Dostoyevsky doing this is laying it on as thick as you possibly can. We have a child's funeral. We get a description of a child-sized coffin. The parents are in hysterics.
Right. Yeah, the father is like destroyed.
He loses his mind. He
completely.
He picks up a little child's shoe, and he looks at the shoe and goes, "My son, where are your feet?"
Yeah,
and it's just as heartbreaking as it possibly can be. Meanwhile, the novel, that's the last chapter. The last page ends on a hopeful note.
Yeah.
So what Dostoyevsky is doing is creating the strongest possible argument for hope. I think all these children are there, like there's murder. Alyosha's family is just like racked and ruined. All of these kind of poor, destitute kids there. What is there? And Alyosha basically says, we're all here together because we loved him and we have this memory. And it's the most important thing in the world that for the rest of your lives, you're going to remember this. You were there for one another.
Yeah.
So, would you agree that the novel, like, just, you know, it's going downhill and downhill and downhill, and then right at the last moment, it flicks back up?
Could I read it? Could I read that last paragraph?
Sure.
Just and then to like maybe use that as like a way to think about your question. Like he says, "I say this in case we become bad," Alyosha went on, "but there's no reason why we should become bad, is there? Let us be first and above all kind, then honest, and then let us never forget each other. I say that again. I give you my word. For my part, I'll never forget one of you. Every face looking at me now, I shall remember even for 30 years. Okay. And then he goes on, and it's beautiful. And then, you know, he says how dear you are to me, and we never should forget Alyosha. And then they say, yay, hurrah for Karamazov. And so I'm thinking about your question now, because you asked, is that like a hopeful note? Is it hopeful? I don't know. I think one way to read it is that the author is fascinated by the power of Alyosha. The the existence of a person like Alyosha is like a wild thing. It's an amazing thing. You know, his equanimity and his level-headedness and his love and the way he navigates the world. And in all this tumult, all this earthquake, and all this drama, he's like the ship that's like steady, throughout, and is able to, be inspiring every step of the way. Maybe.
So, something that's outside of the novel, but it does put some things into context, I think. So in Dostoyevsky's personal life, he lost a child. He had a 2-year-old son that died of epilepsy. The son's name was Alyosha. And early on in the book, if you're just kind of reading it for the first time, you might think to yourself, like, one of the first worst character is the father. Of all the names that you could pick, why would you name the father Fyodor? Why would you name it after yourself?
Yeah. The viewer should fact check me on this because I don't have the source in front of me. But at one point, I remember reading that there's some Dostoyevsky quote or whatever where he said that he identified with Fyodor Karamazov, that was like him in the novel. And I think biographically speaking, it's true because like Fyodor Dostoyevsky, if I remember correctly, had like a gambling problem his entire life, was like totally in debt. And so, yeah, I think that point is correct. The name, I don't think, is a coincidence.
Oh yeah, and I also don't think it's a coincidence that the little boy that actually died, name is Alyosha instead of Alyosha.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
the same name.
Yeah.
We have like almost like forking realities. Like, one reality is that the child is dying.
Yeah.
At that moment, the only thought is this was going to be my hope and my inspiration.
And that's in a way, that's like the ultimate question of the book, maybe, like, why are we not, what do you do when you lose a son, so to speak? Like how do you move on from that, and like that's sort of like the mystery of the book. Like that's like Ivan's question, like the suffering of the children. Like how do you endure a world where there's so much suffering? And who knows what the answer is, but you have different perspectives on that question in this book.
And there are several versions of loss as well. We have these brothers that are by implication all sons. We have one that's getting sent off to Siberia. We have one that's gone insane and have some reason to think that he might be dying. Father Zosima told Alyosha to leave the monastery because he didn't want him there. And so like there's this like constant recurring theme of these children throughout, but we also get all of these sprouting versions of loss in almost all of the main principal characters.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's an answer, but the question is really, really clear. And you can tell Dostoyevsky was grappling with this, but the question is, how do you reconcile?
Yeah. And it's the question, right? Because Dostoyevsky, of course, lived such a horrific life. I mean, his biography is just horror after horror of, the worst imaginable experiences. And like, that's the question, yeah. Like, what would Alyosha say to that question? Like that, maybe that, because you can't answer that question on a expansive scale. There's no maybe one right answer. But if you had Alyosha in the room with you, and you said like Alyosha, like the suffering of the children, or the loss of a child, you get the sense that he would have some sort of internal strength, internal compass, which allows him to sail those seas. I
think that is the last passage.
Yeah.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's so great that the way that he talks to these children, because they're asking and they're concerned and confused, and dealing with emotions, and kind of like Mr. Rogers, like his tactic, not a tactic, but his approach is to just treat them as intelligent adults that can understand complicated, serious issues, and then tell it in a very clear and gentle way.
Yeah, I mean, to be fully confessional, like, like too much information or whatever, like if I've never experienced like real traumatic grief in my life, but I think I would be more like Alyosha's father than Alyosha in real life, like whatever internal, strength he exudes feels foreign to me at this point in my life.
Yeah, all the other characters are the relatable ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's so great. Like, most people that I've talked to that have read this book, one of the first questions is, well, who is your favorite brother?
Sure.
Right. And I know I've met several people that have really disliked Alyosha.
Mm-hmm.
He's a wimp, pushover. And they go, Ivan's the cool one. Ivan gets to talk to the devil. He's brooding. He's moody. He's in the background. I don't know if I've ever met anyone that really liked Dmitri, but he's certainly relatable. Like, everyone knows that person that's just a runaway train. The examples of Alyosha are nearly exclusive to fiction. Every other character in the book are people that are walking around today.
Yeah. I wonder if characters like Alyosha perhaps are more common in monasteries, for example.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I'm doubtful, but maybe that's where they all are.
Maybe.
So maybe not to end on a complete downer. Just out of my own curiosity, do you have any favorite funny parts?
Let's see here. So I always thought this wasn't so funny in the text, but I always thought the part with the putrefaction of Father Zosima was very funny for some reason. But there must be better funny parts. Let me think for a second. I always thought the scene with the devil was so funny.
Okay.
There's one part where the devil says to Ivan, he's describing flying through space. Again, this is like written in the 1800s, and he's imagining flying through space, and he's like talking science and technology with Ivan. He talks to him about, it takes light 8 minutes to get from the sun to the earth, but and I'm traveling through the ethereal spaces at a very high speed. But imagine, and he says, and it's like 100. I forget the temperature he gives. It's like 100 degrees below zero, whatever temperature it is. And he says, the game. This is the devil talking. It's like the game that the schoolgirls play where they take like an unwitting boy and they make him lick an axe and his tongue gets stuck to the axe and they have to like tear off the skin. It's like, imagine in space if you like even touched an axe. I imagine like you lose your finger. And then Ivan says to him, and what if there was an axe in space? And he does, if there was an axe in space, let me think about that. Well, I suppose it would just be like revolving around the earth like a satellite, and then the astronomers would calculate the rising and the falling of the axe.
Yeah, it really is amazing to have those thoughts. Like, it sounds like very 20th century notions. Two of my favorite parts, funny parts that are kind of more slapstick, but Dmitri finally getting to the Lurcher's house, and he's passed out drunk, and like he's trying to wake him, and he's slapping him and beating the like unconscious drunk man, and he works himself up, and like he's in such a frenzy for the whole night that Dmitri, who wanted to pull an all-nighter finally passes out from his own exhaustion. And then when he wakes up late, he opens up his eyes and he sees the lurcher across from him with a new bottle of vodka that's half drunk. And he's already drunk again before he can talk to him.
Yeah.
And then the woman trying to convince Dmitri to go to the gold mine.
Yeah.
That might be my favorite.
I'm going to give you more than 3,000 rubles. Right.
Million.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
So I think we covered a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, this was great.
I don't know how long we've been talking, but I think, what do you think? We're pretty good?
Totally.
Okay, so I'll just kind of give some wrapping up remarks. This is the end of our read-along for the Brothers Karamazov. If you've been reading along, I hope you've been enjoying the book. Please let both of us know what you thought, and if you have any thoughts about all the things that we've been talking about. Very special thanks to Ami for joining me in this conversation and having a really interesting discussion back and forth. And you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you so much, Matthew. This was fun.
All right, thank you. Leave a comment if you would like, and take care. Bye.
Bye.